All right, so Rosh Chodesh Sivan. As always, for the new faces in the room, what we're going to try to accomplish through this shiur is to try to understand some of the kochot of the month and some of the meaning behind the month. And we usually illustrate that through the chagim that happen in that month. So obviously, the big chag of Rosh Chodesh Sivan is Shavuot, which is the day of Kabbalat HaTorah, the day that we as a Jewish nation received the Torah from Hashem at Har Sinai. And every year we commemorate that. Now, on Shavuot, we have a minhag. It's not a halacha, but we have a minhag to read Megillat Ruth. So, heads up, many of you know I grew up in a Haredi background, so if I say Ruth, I'm referring to Ruth. They're one and the same, but it likely will slip. So we have a minhag of reading the story of Ruth, who was the matriarch of the royal dynasty. She was the great-grandmother of David HaMelech. And we hear the story of her coming from the land of Moav all the way into Eretz Yisrael and how she finally gave birth to who was going to be the grandfather of David HaMelech. So we're going to explore the themes of Shavuot, the themes of Megillas Ruth, and try to understand the interplay between the two. Good? Let's get started. So source number one, we're going to start at the very beginning of Megillat Ruth, and this is what the Megillah says. Vayihi bimei shvot hashoftim. It was in the time of the Shoftim, so it was after Bnei Yisrael had entered the land of Israel, but before the Melucha had started, before the kingship had started, there was a period where they were ruled by judges. So it was the period of the Shvot HaShotim. Vayihi ra'av ba'aretz. There was a famine in the land of Israel. Vayelech ish mi beis lachem Yehuda lagur b'stei Moav. And there was a man who moved from Beis Lachem to go live in Stei Moav. Hu ve'eshto u'shtei banav. Him and his wife and his two sons moved from Israel to Stei Moav, which was outside of Israel. Let's look at Rashi. Vayelech ish. There was a man who went. As many of you know, when the Torah says the word ish mi beis Levi, we covered that in last month's shiur. Ish usually speaks about somebody of very high stature. So what does Rashi say? Ashir gadol haya, he was very, very wealthy. Upirnes hadar, and he was the beneficiary of the entire generation. He used to give a lot of charity. Vayetze mi Eretz Yisrael, he left the land of Israel, lachutza le'eretz, and he left the land of Israel. Mipnei, why? Tsaros hayin, because he was feeling stingy. Shaita eno tzara ba'anias habaim, and he was very feeling stingy because there was more and more people that were starving, and he was like nimaslo. He didn't want to give any more, so he left the land of Israel. And for this reason he was punished. Let's continue. Pasuk Beis, V'shem ha'ish Elimelech. Pasuk Gimel, Vayamas Elimelech ish Naami. And he died. He was punished for the reason that he left Israel because he didn't want to help other people. Vatishaer he u'shnei baneha. And she and her two sons decided to stay in Moav. Vayasu lahem nashim. And they got married to Nashim Moaviot, to women from Moav. Shem ha'achat Arpa, V'shem ha'shenit Ruth. That was the first slip. The first part is you got it. Vishem Hashenit, Ruth. And the second one, her name was Ruth. So the protagonist of our story enters in the first time she has married one of the sons of Elimelech. Now let's look again at Rashi. Re'ei chashivuto. Let's see how important this man was. Shaharei hesi eglon melech Moav as bito le Machlon. The king of Moav, Eglon, gave his daughter Ruth to marry Machlon. So Ruth and Arpa were two princesses. They were the daughters of the kings, and they got married to Machlon and Kilion. And the story goes on where Machlon and Kilion then died as well. Those were the two sons of Elimelech. And ultimately Naomi and Arpa and Ruth go back to Israel, and on the way they stop. And Ruth says, listen, I don't want you to continue with me. Please, it's going to be very hard for you. And very famously, Arpa leaves, and Naomi says, no, where you go, I go. I'm continuing on with you. Did I flip it? When I was, by the way, yes, I'm so busy not saying Ruth. By the way, when I was like running through my share with Elidah just to like make sure it all made sense, I was like, and we're going to go through Megillas Esther. She's like, no, not Megillas Esther, Megillas Ruth. So forgive me. Something seems to be jumbled today. So Rus was the one who said, no, I am staying with you, Naomi, and Arpa was the one that went back. So question number one is, why is it, this is a very, very famous question, why is it that we read Megillat Ruth on Shavuot? What's the connection? The day of Kabbalat Torah, why is it that we're reading this specific Megillah? There are many, many Svarim in Tanakh. Why are we reading this specific story of Ruth during Kabbalat Torah, during Shavuot? Good? All right, let's continue. The question becomes even more profound when you look at the background of who Moav was. So where is the first time that we see Moav in the Torah? Avram Avinu left his land that he grew up in, and he left together with his wife, Sarah, and with his nephew, Lot. And they escaped, and him and Lot spent many, many years together, and ultimately Lot parted ways with Avram Avinu and moved to Sodom. And Sodom was a terrible, terrible place that was filled with stinginess and people that were really, really awful to one another. And Hashem decreed that Sodom had to be destroyed. And there's the whole debate between Avram and Hashem, and he tries to save them. Ultimately, Sodom is destroyed, but Lot and his two daughters escape, and his wife, by the way. They escape, and the reason why they escape is because of the schus of Avram Avinu. And it says that they turned around and they saw Sodom being destroyed. And the Torah continues and says that Lot and his two daughters went into the cave, and his two daughters thought that the world entirely had destroyed. Let's look at source number 2. Vatomer habechira, the older daughter said to the younger daughter, El Hatzira, Avinu Zakein, our father is old, V'ish ein ba'aretz, and there's nobody left in the land. The whole entire world has been destroyed. Lavoi leinu kederach kol aretz. Lecha nashkes yayin, let's go bring our father wine, v'nishkeva imo, and let's be intimate with him, v'nechayem mi avinu zera, so that we can continue on humanity. V'taharena shtei bnos lot mi avihem, and from this they had a child. By the way, whoever says that the Torah sugarcoats things, the Torah does not sugarcoat things. This is perfect example, okay? And they got pregnant from this encounter. They both got pregnant. And the elder one gave birth, Ben. Moav. Who? Avi Moav. And the Mefarshim say they called Moav Me'av. This child came from my father. Ad hayom vatzira gam hi yalda ben vatikra shemo ben Amihu Avi ben Amon. And the second one was Ammon. Ammon and Moav were both born from this very illicit encounter between Lot and his two daughters. So you think about who Moav was and the origin of Moav as a nation. You can't think of a more sullied, dirty, ugly place for a nation to come from. So it makes the question even more profound. This is the protagonist of the story that we're talking about on the day of Kabbalas HaTorah. It seems so strange. Let's continue even further. Source number 3. The Torah says, Chomesh Devarim, Lo Yavo Ammoni Umoavi B'Kal Hashem, the same two nations shall never enter into the land, into the nation of Bnei Yisrael. They could, whoever wants to enter, who wants to convert and become one of us, they are welcome to. There's a process they need to go to, but they're welcome to. But Torah says that somebody who comes from the nation of Moav or the nation of Ammon, they're never allowed to. Why? The Torah continues. Gam Dor Asiri, even after the 10th generation, Lo Yavo Lahem B'Kal Hashem Adolam. Pasuk Al Devar, why? Asher Lo Kidmu Eschem Belechem Ubamayim, because they didn't greet you with water and with bread. B'derech B'tzeitchem Mimitzrayim. The Torah seems to illustrate that when Bnei Yisrael left Eretz Yisrael, they passed by Moav, and Moav didn't come out to greet them and feed them with water and with bread. And the Torah says, because they were so cruel and so stingy, this nation shall forever not be allowed to enter into our beautiful nation. So you think about who Moav is, the origin of Moav, and how sullied of an encounter that was, and then who they became as a nation, stingy and self-centered and unwilling to share to a hungry nation that has just escaped from 400 years of slavery, not willing to give them even a little bit. And this is the background of Rus. Right? When we think about like going into Shidduchim and they ask about who's the grandmother, like you can't get worse than this. So how do we understand it? Why is it that we're reading the story of Ruth on the day of Shavuot, which is the most holy, connected moment in time between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's question number 1. Question number 2. In Sefer Malachim, it says as follows. So as we said, the end of the story is where Ruth gives birth to a baby, and that baby is the grandfather of David HaMelech. She is the great-grandmother of David HaMelech. So what does the Chumash say, source number 4? Vayakam HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech stood up. Shlomo was the son of David HaMelech. He stood up, Vayishtachaveu la, and he bowed down. Vayashev al kisei, and he sat down on his throne. Vayesem kisei le'im HaMelech, and he put another chair for the mother of royalty. What does Rashi say? Who is this referring to? Im HaMelech? Le'im HaMelech, Amru Rabosinu, Le'ima Shel Malchut, Hi Ruth. That he put a chair for the mother of all royalty. And question number 2 is, why is it that Ruth was zocheh to be the mother of the entire royal dynasty? Right? Think about the royal dynasty in Britain and how much hullabaloo there is about every little thing. What did they dress? What did they wear? It's when he was anointed, right? That on steroids, the royal dynasty of the chosen nation, she was the matriarch. So why is it that she was zocheh to be the matriarch of the royal lineage that started from David HaMelech? That's our second question. So just to recap, why is it that we're reading Megillat Ruth on Shavuot? What is the connection between the story of Ruth and Kabbalat Torah? And question number 2 is, why is it that Ruth specifically was the one who was zocheh, who merited to be the great-grandmother of David HaMelech? And now we get started. So in order to answer our questions, we really need to come back down to the most fundamental question of what is the purpose of the Torah. We have the Torah in our life, and it fills so much of our life, and there are so many mitzvos, and we're constantly learning about new mitzvos. I remember when Alida was doing he took a series of halacha tests for smicha, for the rabbanut, and he took the first 6, and I was like, all right, after the 6, we're done. And he finished the 6. He's like, no, I'm going to do the next 6. And I was like, oh no. So I remember when he was learning Hilchot Shabbos, and he came in, and every time he was like, I learned a new halacha. And then he came in, he was like, listen, I learned a halacha about the garbage. I was like, Alida, I really don't want to know. It's like there's no end. There's no end to the halachos, right? But what's the purpose? What's the reason? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us the Torah? What are we supposed to take out of the Torah in our day-to-day lives? What is the whole meaning behind Kabbalat Torah? Now, I'm not going to have the hubris to be able to even touch the surface of the meaning of the Torah in our lives. It's obviously a very, very multifaceted answer. We're going to try to answer through one lens of the meaning of the Torah in our lives. So in order to understand why we're doing any of this on Shavuot, we have to understand what is Kabbalat Torah all about. So let's go to the story of Kabbalat Torah in the Chumash. Source number 5. Vayesu mi Refidim. Bnei Yisrael went from Refidim, vayavu b'midbar Sinai, and they came to the midbar of Sinai, where Har Sinai was, vayachanu b'midbar, and they encamped in that desert. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar. We brought this exact source in last month's share. O Moshe Allah el ha'elokim, and Moshe went up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vayikra ilav Hashem min hahar, and God called down to him limar. Ko tomar libeit Yaakov v'tagid libnei Yisrael. This is what you should tell to Bnei Yisrael. This is kind of the introductory paragraph of what Hashem wants to share with Moshe right before Kabbalat Torah. So what does he say? Jump a little bit to the middle of the second column. Ve'asa eschem al kanfei nesharim. I will lift you up onto the wing of eagles. Ve'avi eschem elai, and I'm going to bring you close to me, Bnei Yisrael. Va'ata, and now, im shamoa tishmeu bekoli, if you listen to my voice, ushmartem isprisi, and you really watch carefully my covenant, v'yitam li segula mikol ha'amim, you will be the most precious to me out of all my nations. Ki li kol ha'aretz va'atem tihiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You should be a kingship of Kohanim and a Goy Kadosh and a holy nation. So it's beautiful. Hashem is evoking, come close to me, watch my Torah, and you will be precious to me, and you will be loved. But the Argadal Yahu asks a very, very interesting question. Before we move on to the next source, look at Rashi on source number 5. How does Rashi explain V'atem tiyu mamlechet kohanim? He says mamlechet kohanim means sarim, officers. You should be on officers, a nation filled with officers. So the Argadal Yahu says, wait, I don't understand. We should be a nation of officers? What does that mean? Like we're supposed to rule over other nations? Like what is the Torah trying to tell us? Let's look at the Argadal Yahu. It's so gorgeous. And with this, we're going to try to unlock the secrets behind why HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah. Atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. Pirush Rashi, kohanim means sarim. It means officers. Kamadi amaru b'nei David kohanim hayu. Because it's hard lefaresh ki hakavana kipshuta. That it's literally officers. Sheyu sarim umlachim al umos ha'olam. We should be officers over the other nations. Shaharei ain't said davar haratzoi. We know that this is not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. Ukumo shemavur barambam besof hilchos malachim. What does the Rambam say? Lo nisavu hachachamim v'hanevim yimos hamashiach. The Chachamim and the Nevi'im didn't want Yimos HaMashiach, lo kedei sheyishlatu al kol ha'olam. They didn't want it because that's going to be the period in time where they're going to rule over everyone. V'lo kedei sheyirdu be'aklum, and not because we're going to rule over the other nations. What is the reason? Ela kedei sheyu pnuyim b'Torah u'b'chachma. The reason why all of our Nevi'im and Rabbanim and all of the holy people that came before us, the reason why they so yearn the times of Mashiach is why? So that they could be free to keep the Torah. So if that's the case, if the ultimate purpose is not to rule over the other nations, then what does the Torah mean when it says we should be officers? What is the meaning behind it? Harei she'ein zeh haratzon sheyeh b'nei Yisrael mushlim v'sarim al ha'umos ha'olam. It is clear that our purpose is not to rule over the other nations. So what is the meaning? Ela shehakavana kan hu. Second column. We can understand this through a story that's brought in the Sefer HaKuzari, which is a very famous philosophical sefer, where, I'm forgetting, who was it? Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, thank you, was having a debate. Alexa, I could always count on you. Thank you. The Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was having a debate, and they were having a philosophical debate about a lot of deep topics in the Torah. So the Argadal goes on to bring a story from the Sefer HaKuzari. Shemelech Kuzari, the king of Kuzar, bikesh sheyitaer lo mahu chasid. He said to Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, tell me, what is a chasid? Explain it to me. V'yeshivu mashal, and this is how he responded. Le'achad shesholet al machuso. It is like somebody who rules over his whole entire nation. V'hakol shom'im lekolo, and everybody listens to him. V'kol echad oseh ma shemutal alav, and everybody does exactly as is commanded of him. V'sha'alhu HaMelech, but the Melech of Kuzar responded and said, Ani sha'alti lita'er li chasid. I asked you to explain who a chassid is. V'ti'arta li melech, and you explained to me what a king is. You didn't describe a chassid, you described a king. V'amar lo, emes amarta. You're saying the truth. Ki ha-chassid hu moshel al kol ivarav. A chassid is somebody who has complete control over his body, over all of his limbs, over all of his base animalistic instincts, over all of his bad attributes. He has absolute and complete control over what he does and what doesn't do. Shu sholit al kol haramachivarim, over all of his limbs. Shelo shekulo ya'asur tzuno. Umocho, his brain, shalit al kol haguf shelo. It's his intellect and his reasoning and his rationale supersedes any other drive, any other base physical drive of his. V'zeh yishlamar hu inyan melech, and that is what it means when it says mamleches kohanim, a nation of officers. Shekasav kan b'parsha shene'amar libnei Yisrael va'atem Tihiyu li mamleches kohanim, be a nation of officers. She'im yihiyu b'madrega zu, get to this level. Sheyes sarim al atzmam, that you can be officers over yourselves. So profound. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us with a body. And on many levels, the Maharal talks about this a lot. On many, many levels, we have a nefesh behemis. That's the terminology that the Maharal used. We have a physical, animalistic soul within us that makes us seek pleasure and ego and all the drives that are pulling us towards. Same as we've spoken about this in the past. Same as animals desire a lot of these things. We have those drives within us. And what the Or Gedalia is saying when Hashem says, "Be a mamleches kohanim," the Torah is there to guide you, to help you to supersede these instincts, to become more than your nefesh behemoths, to become elevated, spiritual, connected to a higher source, and not always be driven and guided by those drives that many, many, many people simply don't have control over us. So according to our Mefarshim, the purpose of the Torah is to help us to tap in to the best version of ourselves. And we see that. We see that through so many mitzvos. Think about Shabbos, for example. I use this as an example because it's so easy, right? I'm a workaholic, self-proclaimed, right? If I didn't have Shabbos, I would never stop. I would just keep on going and going and going and going. And Shabbos is a moment in time where Hashem says, sorry, pause, reconnect, rekindle, look your children in the eye, sit on the floor and play a puzzle with them. Talk about spiritual and elevated topics. Go to shul, reconnect with your community. Things that in the humdrum of life, in that never-ending guinea pig wheel. I told you something's jumbled today. Guinea pig wheel of life. We wouldn't be able to pause. And Hashem says, pause. Because that will bring out the best in you. It will bring out the best in you as spouses, as parents, as friends, as members of the community. That's one example. Another example, tznius. This is one that's really hard for so many of us because it's our sense of identity. But it's Hashem's way of saying, I am creating a social construct that protects the family unit and protects us from one another, because according to our instincts, many of us wouldn't be faithful to our spouses left to our own devices. So Hashem says tznius and nida and negia and all these things to protect the family unit. And I had an epiphany, right? So those are ones that are easy to understand. And then there are ones that are more abstract and harder to understand. Why are these mitzvos helping us to reach a more elevated sense of self? And I had an epiphany when I was actually on the way to the Shiva for Natan, Hashem Yimkom Demo, Zechrono Livracha. And I was driving there and I was thinking to myself, Shiva is such an incredible mitzvah. Imagine we didn't have the mitzvah of Shiva. I'd be sitting in my home and I'd say to myself, should I really show up? Maybe they don't want me. Maybe it will be too painful. Maybe they want their space. And everybody would be double guessing and triple guessing and quadruple guessing themselves. And you know what would happen? The family would be sitting all alone with their pain and with their suffering. And instead Hashem says, show up. Show up. Be there. Be present. And we did. We came out in the hundreds, in the thousands. People that knew the Rosenfelds and people that were absolute strangers. Am Yisrael came out outpouring with love. And we came. Why? Because Kadosh Baruch Hu said, this is the framework to be your best self as individuals and as a community. And at the same time, Hashem says, another halacha of Shiva, show up, but don't talk. The halacha is, before the Avel says anything to you, you're not allowed to say anything to them. Because Hashem says, yes, be there. show your emotional support, but it could be they're not going to have the energy to talk, and they're not going to have the emotional bandwidth to engage. So only talk once they've shown you that they are ready. It's so beautiful. It's so wise. And the halacha guides us to the most beautiful fulfillment of who we could become as human beings. And so with that, we're going to play our first song, Kanfei Nesharim. If you go back to source number 5, the song are the words from source number 5.
Im shamoya tishmu v'koili Ushmartem es brisi V'isem li segula Mikol ha'amim v'yato Im shamoya tishmu v'koili Ushmartem es brisi V'isem li segula Mikol ha'amim V'yaso eschem al kanfei nesharim V'yovi eschem elai V'yovi eschem elai V'yaso eschem al kanfei nesharim V'yovi eschem elai V'yovi eschem elai Im shamoya tishmu v'koili Ushmartem es brisi V'isem li segula Mikol ha'amim Im v'yato Im shamoya tishmu v'koili Ushmartem es brisi V'isem li segula Mikol ha'amim V'yeso eschem al kanfei nesharim V'yovi eschem elai V'yovi eschem elai V'yeso eschem al kanfei nesharim V'yovi eschem elai
His voice is amazing. Simcha Leiner. He has just the most gorgeous, gorgeous voice. And this Yesod is rooted in all of the Mefarshim, the Rishonim, the Tanaim. They talk about this over and over, how the Torah is our blueprint for personal and national refinement. Let's look at source number 7. Mor Nevuchim Shel HaRambam. Rambam was a Rishon, and he says as follows. Kavanas Klal HaTorah. The purpose of the entire Torah. He's not mincing words. The purpose of the entire Torah, Shnei Dvarim, is 2 things. Tikun HaNefesh, V'tikun HaGuf. To improve who we are. That is the purpose of all of the Torah. And the Sefer HaChinuch famously goes through every single mitzvah and tries to attribute a reason as to why it is connected to either Tikun HaNefesh or Tikun HaGuf. And it's an amazing thing going through it and seeing how it explains how every single mitzvah is there to bring out our potential. Because as human beings, we are limited and we are finite in our intellect and we can't always understand, and we are driven by really strong attributes, some of which are good, some of which are bad. And Hashem says, here are your guardrails to help you be a better person. Let's look at source number 8. This is the Ramban, not to be confused with the Rambam, Maimonides and Nachmanides. And the Ramban says as follows, Uksav harav b'moreh hanevuchim, and he is quoting the Rambam. Ki ta'am shiluach hakein, the reason why we do shiluach hakein, v'ta'am oso v'es bino v'lo tishtachu b'yom echad, there is a mitzvah that you're not allowed to kill both a mother and a son, a cow and their calf, on the same day. What is the reason? Kedei lizaher shelo yishchot haben be'inei ha'im. To be careful that you shouldn't slaughter the baby calf in front of its mother. Ki yesh lebehemus da'aga gdola bazeh, because the mother will be really pained by this. Famously, this is actually really funny. When I was in 6th grade, I had a rip-roaring debate with my best friend, still my best friend from childhood, Sarah, who I love dearly, whether animals have feelings. She was on the side that animals absolutely have feelings, and me being a haughty 6th grader, thinking I knew everything, I was like, no, animals don't have feelings. Well, the Ramban disagrees with me, okay? I now think that animals do have feelings. So the Ramban says that the mitzvah is why you shouldn't slaughter a baby calf in front of their mother. The reason is because it will pain them. Be'ein hafresh bin da'agas ha'adam le'da'agas ha'behema al b'neihem. Ki avas ha'im v'chanusa libnei bitzna inena nimshach acharei ha'seichel. It's so visceral and it's so real. V'hadibur abal hu mif'oles koach ha'machshava ha'mitzuya bebehemos kasher hi mitzuya b'adam. Let's look at the last line. Be'im kain ein ikar ha'isar be'oso v'espino rak bebino ve'oso abal hakol harchaka v'yoter nachon. The reason is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to become cruel. And he knew that if we would become habituated to killing a calf in front of the mother cow, it would create a level of thickness. And it would desensitize us. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't want you to become desensitized. I want you to care about that mother cow, so that when it comes even more so to your fellow human being, you'll have retained your humanity and your sensitivity. Amazing. Most of us aren't butchers, but imagine somebody that is their career, that is their profession. You could imagine that they could develop a level of callousness. So Hashem says, you can't do it on the same day. Amazing, a tiny, tiny little detail in the Torah. Similarly, the Ramban continues in the same Perush. What does God really care? Whether we should slaughter an animal from the front of the neck, or we should slaughter from the back of the neck. What does it matter? And he goes on to say similarly, Halo nitznu ha-mitzvos, the mitzvos were only given, Ella litzaref bahem habrios, to refine humanity, to purify ourselves. And if by slaughtering from the front of the neck makes the cow feel less pain, then Hashem says, do it that way, because that will help keep you sensitive and refined and in tune. And that is the purpose of all of the mitzvos. And you see that the Gedolei Hadar, those who spend every second of every day learning the Torah, they are the most refined, beautiful versions of what us as people could become. They say about Rav Shlomo Zalman was my great-grandfather-in-law. So my husband's father's father was actually very, very close to Rav Shlomo Zalman. They both lived in Shari Tzedek at the same time, and they were very, very close. And we have like a wealth of stories in the family about Rav Shlomo Zalman because of it. And they say about Rosh Zalman, the stories of him and his sensitivity to other people are just incredible. So for example, one story that I heard from my father-in-law was that there was a father that came to Rosh Zalman and he said, I have a shaila, I have a halachic question. My son is going to be bar mitzvah this Shabbos, and he has dyslexia, and he's been practicing for months and months and months and months for the Haftorah. He couldn't do the parsha because it was too long, but he was practicing for months for the Haftorah. And I just realized that Sunday is Rosh Chodesh. And when Sunday is Rosh Chodesh, what happens is there's a different Haftorah. It's called Mimachoras Shabbos. I think that's what it's called. There's a different Haftorah that's leaned when Sunday is Rosh Chodesh. And he said, when I was planning for the bar mitzvah, I didn't even think of looking at the calendar, and it totally slipped my mind. I just didn't realize. And the Haftorah that he practiced for is not the Haftorah that is for real. So come Shabbos, what should he do? Should he lean or should he not lean? Rosh Zalman closed his eyes. He thought, and he said he should absolutely lean the Haftorah that he practiced for. And he didn't explain. And that was it. And the father left. And you think that's the story of the refinement. It's not. It gets even better. And Shabbos morning, everybody comes into shul and they're starting to daven, and there's like, the regular rhythm of what a shul looks like on Shabbos day. And suddenly there's this murmuring that's going on, and people are hushabushing, and people turn around, and who's walking in the door? It's Rosh Zalman. This bar mitzvah boy lived in Zichron Moshe, which is near Geula. Rosh Zalman lived in Shari Tzedek. It's like a 35, 40-minute walk. I could tell you, I've done it. Rosh Zalman was he wasn't young at the time, let's put it that way. And he walked in the door and he sat down and he just sat there, and the boy got up and he leaned to the Haftorah. And afterwards, the father came over to him and he said, Harav, what's the honor? What do I have this honor for? And Rosh Zalman said, I knew that by leaning this Haftorah, there would be people in the shul that would say, shh, he's leaning the wrong Haftorah. And I knew that it would embarrass your son. And so I said, if I show up and I sit there and I don't say anything, nobody would dare to contradict me. And that's why I came, because I didn't want your son to be embarrassed. That's refinement. That is a next level of sensitivity to another human being. And they say that when Shlomo Zalman's wife passed away, so there's a minhag in Klal Yisrael that you ask mechila from the person that has parted for anything that you've wronged them. And Rav Shlomo Zalman got up and he clapped on the bima and he says, it's a minhag in Klal Yisrael to ask mechila. He says, my dear wife, I don't need to ask mechila because I know that I've never raised my voice at you. That's the Torah. That's the Torah as the guidebook to helping us live the most beautiful version of ourselves. So let's continue in the story of Kabbalas HaTorah. Let's jump to source number 11. There's a very, very famous medrash that before Hashem gave the Torah to Am Yisrael, he first went to all the nations and asked them, do you want the Torah? And this is what the medrash says. This is the Sifri. Davar achav, Yomar Hashem Misinai ba. Kishenigla HaKadosh Baruch Hu litain Torah liYisrael, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to give the Torah to Am Yisrael. Lo al Yisrael bilvad hu nigla. He didn't just reveal himself to Bnei Yisrael. Ella al kol ha'umos. Tchila halach itzel bnei Esav. He went to Esav. Amar lahem. Mekablim atem es HaTorah. Do you accept the Torah? Amru lo, ma katuv bo. What does it say in it? Amar lahem, lo tirtzach. You're not allowed to kill. You're not allowed to murder. Amrulam, kol atzmam shel osam ha'anashim ba'avihem. Our entire nation is built around the thing. Rotseachu, we are murderers. That is what we do. Shene'amar v'hayadayim midei Esav. That is our essence. And they refused, and they didn't accept. HaKadosh Baruch Hu continued, Halach etzel b'nei Ammon u'Moav. This is a story that we just said. Amar lahem mekablim atem es haTorah. Do you accept the Torah? Amru lo ma kasuv bo. Amar lahem lo tinaf. Don't commit adultery. Don't do illicit acts. Amrulo, kol atzma, our entire essence, sha'erva, our whole origin story is around an illicit relationship. And they refused. Shene'amar v'taren shtei banos lot me'avihem. Halach itzel b'nei Yishmael. We're right in the middle of the paragraph. Amar lahem mekablim atem es haTorah. Do you accept the Torah? Amrulo ma kasuv bo. What does it say in it? Amar lahem lo tignav. Don't steal. Amrulo atzmam avihem listim. We are bandits and robbers. That is our whole identity. Hishne Amar, and he continues on. So he went from nation to nation, said, what does it say? And he brought one of the Asara Sadibros, and they said, no, we can't do that. This is our identity. So what does it show? That the other nations, when they were presented with the fact, you have your way of doing things, you have your base animalistic drives that drive you to murder and kill and rob and cheat and do all these terrible things. Do you want a guidebook that will help you be a better version of yourself? And they said, no, we're not interested. We like it. We're happy with the way we are. But then, it's very easy to draw examples in the binary. Right? Of course, if somebody loves to rape and murder and steal, they're not going to want the Torah. But what if there's somebody that says, you know what? I'm a really moral person. I understand I shouldn't kill. I shouldn't hurt other people. I should try to give charity. I get it. Do I still need the Torah? It's a really good question. Right? It's easy for us to see why people that are like, no, I like being terrible, why they wouldn't accept the Torah. But what if somebody said, you know what? If you're telling me the Torah helps me be the best version of myself, I'm great. I'm super worked on. I go to my therapist once a week. I've figured out all of my childhood trauma. I'm good. I don't need the Torah. So what does the Torah respond to that? Let's go back to source number 9. The Ramban al Torah, it says that the luchos were 2 stone tablets. And on the one side were five of the Aseret HaDibros, and the other side were another 5. What does the Ramban famously say? V'hine Aseret HaDibros chamisha b'kavod habore. The first 5 are between us and God. V'chamisha l'tovos ha'adam. The other 5 are bein adam l'chaviro. The first 5 are between us and God. You should daven, you should put on tefillin, you should things that have nothing to do with interpersonal relationships. And the other 5 are bein adam l'chaviro. So what does Rav Shamshin Raphael Hirsch say? Beautifully. So Rav Shamshin Raphael Hirsch wrote his commentary on the Torah in German. So there's a translation in Hebrew and a translation in English. Last time I brought the translation in Hebrew, but this time I figured it would be a bit of a break to do the translation in English. So what does Rav Shamshin Raphael Hirsch say? Building off of the Ramban, where he says you have the Bein Adam L'Chavero and Bein Adam L'Makom. He says as follows. The 2 tablets lay side by side inside of the Aron. They proclaim themselves to be one unit. If one tablet did contain preferably the basic principles of our relationship to God, mitzvos shebein adam lamakom, and the other that of our social relation to our fellow men, they are still in their value before God, equal in their value before God, and in all influence in ensuring our happiness, completely equal to one another. Neither can do without the other. Neither can take the place of the other. Neither may lose sight of the other. And Rav Shamshin Raphael Hirsch says that if you just want to do Bein Adam L'Makom and you say, forget about it, I'm not interested in Bein Adam L'Chavero, that could lead to some really pretty terrible stuff. We see that today with modern Islam, all in the name of God. How terrible could that be? Similarly, people that say, I could just do the Bein Adam L'Chavero, and I don't need the Bein Adam L'Makom. I don't need all the other stuff in the Torah. I figured it out. I'm a principled and moral person, and I'm good. Hashem says that could also lead to some pretty terrible stuff. Think about Nazi Germany. Why did they do it? For eugenics, for the greater of humanity. We think we're going to cull this nation because we think they're awful and humanity will be better off. So one without the other cannot survive. So the Torah says, yes, being a moral person, a lot of it intuitively can understand. But human beings left to our own devices, without HaKadosh Baruch Hu and without the Torah guiding us, morality could be warped. And morality can change. And don't we see that ever better than today, when all of the world is screaming genocide in Gaza, and have turned a blind eye to October 7th. That's morality being warped without God. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you want to live your most beautiful version of yourself? Most of us aren't evil and terrible like the Medrash, where it says, I like to kill, I like to murder, I like to steal. Most of us aren't like that. But even if we are good people, we still need the Torah. It's an intricate intertwinement of morality with halacha, with the Torah, and the two, till death do us part, cannot be separated from one another. And now we come back to Rosh. Because who better epitomizes the warping and distortion of something good, of morality as we see it, than Moav? Where did Moav come from? From Lot. Where did Lot come from? The family of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu, who his primary, strongest attribute was chesed, kindness, giving, loving. And Lot, who lived in his home and learned that from him. His children, why did they do what they do? They did it because they thought the world had been destroyed. And they wanted to keep humanity going. So they did it from a place of chesed. They thought they were doing good to humanity, but it was warped and distorted because it wasn't within the framework of halacha. And that's why you see in source, I'm jumping again, forgive me, source number 14, when the Torah talks about illicit relations, it says, ki chesed hu. The Torah uses the word chesed when it's describing illicit relations. And there's lots of explanations why. But the way Rashi explains it is two sides of one coin. You take the attribute of loving and giving and you take it to the nth degree, and it could turn into something really gross. So morality by itself doesn't work. You need the Torah to say, oh, yes, give and love and be kind, but here are the guardrails. Here's where it stops. Here's where it's wrong and an aberration of what chesed should be. So no nation better epitomizes the distortion of morality and the distortion of us becoming good people more than Moav. They came from chesed, but they took chesed and they destroyed it. They warped it. They distorted it. And so when it comes to Rosh, she comes from this background. She comes from this ugly, dirty, horrible background, which, by the way, should be such an inspiration for each of us. We all come from our own version of something messed up, right? Whether it's within our family, whether it was a teacher, whether it was a friend, whether it was whatever it is. Rosh became the mother of royalty. Take what you've been through and channel it and leverage it. And that's what Rosh did. Rosh said, I come from Avram Avinu. I come from Lot. My great-grandfathers, they distorted what chesed is. They did something really ugly with it. And then continue on, what else did they do? They abandoned chesed. When Bnei Yisrael were passing through their land and they didn't give, they just completely lost their guardrails. So what did Rosh say? I recognize and I realize that for me to rediscover what being a kind and good person is can only be through the framework of Torah. And that is what is the famous lines from Megillas Rosh, source number 12. Vatomer Ruth said to Naomi, when Naomi tried to make her go around and go back to Moab, what did Ruth say to her? Al tifki ibi, don't try to convince me, la'azvech, l'shuv me'achorayach, to turn my back to you. Ki el asher telchi elech, wherever you go, I go. V'kasher talini alin, and wherever you sleep, I sleep. Amich, ami, your nation is my nation. Ve'elokayach, Elokai, your God is my God. V'asher tamusi amos, wherever you die, I die. V'sham akaver bo, and I will be buried with you. Ya'aseh Hashem li, v'cho yosef bi hamaves yiparid b'ni, may death do us part. Maybe that's actually where it comes from. Come to think of it. Until death do us part. Now the Gemara says it's a beautiful, poetic, gorgeous line. Wherever you go, I go. Wherever you sleep. But the Gemara actually illustrates from it something amazing. The Gemara says that Naomi saw that Rus wanted to convert. And we learn from this, the Hilchos Gerus, that when somebody tries to convert, you try to convince them otherwise. You really try to show them how difficult and how hard the Torah is so that you see how committed they are. And if they're not committed, it's okay. You could be a wonderful and good person. You don't need to be Jewish. And we learn these through this Gemara. So what does the Gemara say? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, source number 13. Naomi saw that she was being really, really strong-hearted, and she didn't want to go back. And she started to talk to her. And what did she say? Amrallah, third line. Asir lan tchun Shabbos. When it comes to Shabbos, you're not allowed to walk outside of the tchum, outside of the boundaries of a city. She was telling her, listen, you can't go wherever you want to go. There's rules around where you could walk on Shabbos. And what did Rus respond to her? Ka'asher telchi elech. Wherever you walk, I walk. So it was a rebuttal to one of her comments of this is what the halacha says. And Rus said, no, wherever you walk, I walk. I'm good with that. Asir lach yichud. You're not allowed to have yichud. You're not allowed to be in a room alone with another man. And what did she say? Ba'asher talini alin. Wherever you sleep, I sleep. Whatever your rules are about intimacy, I accept that. Asir lachichod basher talini alin. Umiftidan shesh meos v'yud gimel mitzvos. Naomi said to her, but we have 613 mitzvos. And what did she say? Amich ami, your nation is my nation. Asir lach avodas kochavim. You're not allowed to go and worship idols. What did she say? Ve'elokayech Elokai. Your God is my God. It's such a deeper, richer understanding of these words. It was one for one. They were having a dialogue. She was saying a halach and she said, no, your God is my God. Arba misos nimsru lebeistin. You should know if you mess up, there's 4 misos of beistin. There's 4 capital punishments in the Torah. By the way, one of which is hafrashas challah. I did not know that. We have to be really careful with hafrashas challah. When you take that challah off, make sure to burn it, please. Arba misos beistin. There are 4 ways that you can be decreed to capital punishment according to the beistin. What did she say? Kasher tamusi amos. So line for line, she was sharing with her the halachos, and she said, I accept, because she had come to this realization that nothing has meaning outside of the framework of Torah. Coming from her background, seeing how something could get so distorted and so warped outside of the framework of the Torah, she said, I accept it all. Whether I understand it or I don't understand it, whether I understand why it makes me a better person or whether I don't understand it, I don't have the prerogative of picking and choosing. I accept it all. And that is why we read the story of Rus, of Ruth, on Shavuot. Because she perfectly epitomizes the true Kabbalat Torah, the true understanding of, I understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the master of the universe, the omniscient, the omnipotent, the one who understands me better than I will ever understand myself, said, Bubaleh, this is the way to do it. You have some deep pain from one of your parents hurting you as a child. I know it's hard. Do it, because ultimately it will be for your good. Over and over, all of these halachos are for our good. And Rus, more than anyone, epitomizes that, the understanding of when you don't do it through Torah, it could get so messed up, upside down, backwards as forwards. But through the lens of Torah, you could reclaim what being a good person means. She could reclaim the koach of her lineage, which was chesed. Before we continue, let's go to our second song, Ribono.
ריבונו של עולם, אני מבקש ממך בכל ליבי ובזה התפילה, שתנחה אותי בדרך ישרה ותודיעני אורח התורה, שתדריכני בעמיתך. אי וזקן לי לבני ביתי לעבוד אותך באהבה ויראה, אני מבקש ממך. אני מבקש ממך בכל ליבי ובזה התפילה, שתנחה אותי בדרך ישרה ותודיעני אורח התורה, שתניחני בעמיתך. שתדריכני בעמיתך ותזכר לי ולבני ביתי לעבוד אותך באהבה ויראה, אני מבקש ממך. שתניחני בעמיתך. אי ותזכר לי ולבני ביתי לעבוד אותך באהבה ויראה, אני מבקש ממך.
And you see through the story of Megillas Rus how Rus really was able to reclaim the definition of chesed. The whole Megillah talks about Rus's chesed for her mother-in-law, how she came back and she refused to abandon her. And she went to gather wheat for her in the field, and Boaz's chesed for Rus. The whole story of Megillas Rus is about chesed, but the correct chesed through the lens of Torah. Let's look at source number 15. So we come to the end of the story, and Rus realizes there's a mitzvah of yibum in the Torah that when somebody's husband passes away, if there's a relative There's a mitzvah for the relative to marry them, and that way, that person, spiritually, their neshama has a continuity through the relative. And Boaz was a relative, and Ruth came to Boaz because she wanted to beg him to marry her so that she could have yibum with Boaz and continue her husband's legacy and her mother-in-law's legacy, because Naomi, remember, had no more children. That was it. This was the end of her lineage. So it says that Ruth came to Boaz, and he looked, and he saw her, and he says, Vayomer mi'at, who are you? Vatomer, and she said, Anochi Ruth, amitecha, upirashta knafecha, please spread your wings to protect me. Alamasecha ki goal ata, you are my redeemer. Vayomer, and Boaz said to her, Bruchaat, you are welcome, you are blessed, la Hashem. You will be blessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Biti, my daughter. It's like a term of endearment. Hetavta chesed ha'acharon man harishon. The chesed that you have done, the second chesed that you have done, is even greater than the first chesed. And the Mefarshim explain the first chesed was how she refused to leave Naomi. And she followed her, and she was miskayer, and she took care of her. And the second chesed, what was the second chesed? Lebilti leches acharei habachurim imdal ve'ama ashir. And the Mefarshim say she was very, very, very beautiful. She was very young, and she could have remarried to anyone. And he said, you want to marry me even though I'm an old man? The chesed that you are doing for your late husband's neshama and for your mother-in-law to ensure that her legacy doesn't end, that is the greatest chesed of all. And this is where I literally got chills when I read this. Va'ata biti al tir'i, don't be afraid. Kol asher tomri, everything that you say, a'aselach, I will do. Ki yadoa kol sha'ar ami, everybody knows. Ki eshet chayil at, you are an eshes chayil. Let's look at Mishlei. Eshes chayil mi yimtza v'rachok mi pninim mechra. Piha pascha bechachma v'torat chesed al lishona. The chesed through Torah is on her lips. It's not any chesed. It's the Torah's version of chesed. Ruth is an eshes chayil. She epitomized recapturing what chesed means despite everything in her lineage. And he says, because you are an eshet chayil, you will get all of the bracha and everything that you deserve. And now we come to our second question, which was, why is it that Ruth was zocheh to be the mother of royalty, to be the matriarch of this dynasty? So remember what we said by Mamleches Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, that what is a melech? Somebody who's perfectly in control, where all of their limbs and their desires and their drives, they are in control of that. They are not driven by their anger and their greed and their ego and their selfishness. They are in control of that. That is a melech. And that is what Naomi perfectly displayed by showing through Torah that she could redefine all of the negative attributes from where she came from. Let's look at source number 17. V'haya, this is talking about the king of Israel, of the Jewish nation and their mitzvos. Keshifto al kisei mamlachto, when he sits on his throne. There is a halacha, v'ksav lo es mishnah Torah. The king needs to write a sefer Torah, hazos, al sefer milfanei hakohanim ve'levinim, v'haita imo. It should always be with him. V'karobo kol yimei chayav, and he needs to read from it every single day. Why? Lima'an yilmad liyira es Hashem, so that he should always fear God, Elokav, lishmor es kol divarai haTorah hazos, v'es hachukim ha'ele la'asusam, libilti Rom livavo, so that the fact that he is a king shouldn't get to his head. There's no greater instinct that when people tell you you're amazing and you're wonderful and you have power, it gets to you. So Hashem says, take that, constrain it, channel it through the lens of Torah. A king A melech b'Yehuda, a melech b'Yisrael, their job is to be perfectly in control of all of their base animalistic instincts through the Torah, through the Sefer Torah. And nobody epitomizes that more than Ruth. And that is why she was Zocha to be the Aim b'Yisrael. And at the very, very, very end of the Torah, Moshe tells Bnei Yisrael that the Torah, ki karov elecha ma'od, it's really, really close to you, and it's really simple. And many of the Mefarshim ask, it's not simple. It's really not simple. It's really, really difficult. And perhaps we could say through our learning today, when we recognize that the Torah is our framework, it's our guide, it's our loving Father saying to us, you really like sugar, but sugar's really not good for you. In all of its tiny minutia, when we realize that, then it becomes ki karov elecha. All of those mitzvos suddenly don't become limitations and constraints and handcuffs, but they become freedom. They become your enablement to become the best version of yourself. And with that, we're going to do our final song, Ki Karov Elecha. So I give us all a bracha, including myself, that the mitzvos that we realize are good for us, that we should love and should bring out the best in us, and the mitzvos that we struggle with more, that we should learn to understand the beauty in them and learn to understand how infinitely wise HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in giving us this framework, and that should help us to live our most beautiful, fulfilled lives.